Hi, it's Dr. Noel Williams, January 14th, 2020, back after about a week break. COVID update today. So let's first talk about the vaccine, but before we talk about the vaccine, we're going to talk about immunity to remind people how it works. Then we're going to talk about just things going on with COVID and the massive increase in cases. But first, how does your immune system work? Well, there's two parts. I've gone over this before many months ago, but just as a review, you have innate immunity and acquired immunity. Innate immunity is your built-in immunity that's non-specific and fights off infections as you get them. You then can adapt or acquire immunity through your lymphocytic system with your B cells and T cells. T lymphocytes are natural killer cells and can be tuned in to attack specific things. And that's an important thing to remember with acquired immunity. And then the second part of the acquired immunity, which is what we more commonly think of, which is your B cells, well, maybe not most of us, but your B cells that make antibodies. And the antibodies from the B cells fight off infection. So when you get a COVID infection, or you get mononucleosis, or you get chickenpox, for those of you who are old enough to remember having chickenpox, first you try to fight it with your innate immunity and you release inflammatory mediators that are trying to hurt the viruses. And then you secondarily develop acquired immunity to it, where you start to make antibodies to tone it down further, and natural killer cells, and all this stuff comes together to fight off an infection. Unfortunately, though, sometimes your innate immunity response can be rather vicious, and your acquired immunity response can be a little vicious, and it attacks you as much as it attacks the virus or the bacteria. And it results in significant inflammation, I already said that, significant inflammation and downstream mediators that can cause all kinds of problems. And that's basically what is the cytokine storm in COVID. And that's what really kills people, or blood clots or associated sequelae or side effects from that. So how does a vaccine work? Well, a vaccine works by first coming into your system, affecting your innate immune system some, which is why you can get sore or tired initially. And then your adaptive or acquired immunity starts to respond to it, and both your B lymphocytes and your T lymphocytes respond to it. So it's a multi-level response. And the thing that happens is you get permanency of immune response to most things through that are viral. So you can't get viral infections of the same type again with the same attacking features. So what happens with flu or influenza A and B, the tips of the flu, where it attaches to the human cells, changes, so you have to make new antibodies all the time to fight it. The thing with COVID is the spike protein tip, which is considered the S1 binding site for antibodies, is kind of conservative. It hasn't changed. COVID mutates every third or fourth transmission, and so there's been millions of mutations already. But that little end of the spike, which I've talked about so much, is not changing, and the antibodies are binding there. So even with the variant in England that's more infectious, the antibody's still inactivated. The mink one, again, same thing. And so that's why there really has not been much in the way of reinfection. There'd always be a cluster. So the take-home message first and foremost is, if you got COVID already, there's a great paper, which I will post. I will read you the title of it, because it finally came out and said that, hey, you have innate immunity from COVID. I'm sorry. Get mad at me for those of you who can't understand immunology, but durable SARS-CoV-2 B cell immunity after mild or severe infection, because your B cells are what make the antibodies. The antibody levels aren't as important as the B cells, because the B cells are permanently programmed, a section of them, as are T cells, to fight COVID. That isn't going to go away in the next week or year. They're there. So we don't know if this virus does mutate at the tip at some point. That will be a potential problem if there's not cross-reactivity, but it hasn't. And so there is sustained long-term immunity to COVID from mild or greater infections. The entire basis of the vaccine, and this is it for both Moderna which I always mispronounce. And Pfizer is trying to get to the antibody levels of convalescent patients. And I'm going to talk all about that too, because if once you realize how little data they had to go for the vaccine, which did work, you would be shocked, but I'll go over that. So the bottom line is you have innate immunity and acquired immunity. We're trying to get the acquired immunity so that way you have long-term protection. So you give a vaccine, donk, it goes in your body. Your innate immune system first reacts. That's why you can get tired, sick, achy. And then your acquired immunity kicks on and you start making antibodies and getting T lymphocytes ready to fight it off. And then that long-term antibody response is what protects you. So if you look at the Pfizer or Moderna vaccine, basically at 10 days, the graphs split. And so based on however you want to look at it, essentially in my book, when I look at the data, the Pfizer people say it's 52% at day 21 and 94% at day 28. But the reality is probably 95% of people are immune at day 10 to 12. And you have a fixed group at 5% who are just not going to respond to the vaccine. Bad luck. But for 95% of people, it looks like they're going to respond. I'm not going into whether it's one vaccine or two. The study was two. They did not look at it just for one, but it's clearly 95%. But again, I'll post the curve and you can make your own judgment if you think it's when that 95% protection rate starts coming in to the population. I think the graph is very, very clear. So when you get the vaccine, you're going to get antibody levels that are equivalent to, so what they did first is they did a phase 1/2 trial where they took a grand total of 195 people and split them into 8 groups. One of the groups was placebo. So about 24 people were in that, roughly. And then every other group had roughly whatever is left, 7 or 8 18 or 20 some people, 22 people in each group. So first there was so just to make this all make sense, in the groups you split each group then into one of 4 and one of 3. And one of the groups was for a vaccine that they decided not to use. One was for the one they did use. So now we're down to about, 4 groups of, 20 odd people. One of them got thrown out because it was only a 1-dose vaccine and they didn't really report what happened. So then you have 3 doses of vaccine in the final, in this section. So one group got 10 micrograms, one group got 20 micrograms, and one group got 30 micrograms of the vaccinating agent, both on day 1 and day 7. And the one on day 7, or on day 21, I'm sorry, showed, I know I'm not explaining this as well as I could, but basically, in the end, that group of 30 micrograms on day 1 and day 21 had the antibody response that was above the convalescent plasma response of someone who got infected. So that's how they based whether it was going to give immunity or not. So the first thing to realize in retrospect is the entire basis of the immunity is the immunity you get from having the infection. So obviously if you're infected, you have immunity. Number 2 is that when you look at the people who were in the infected group, it was only 30 people roughly. So the entire basis of the trial for 40,000 people, which is okay because the trial safety data is really good now, was one group of about 25 people who were the active arm and 30 people who were in the control arm. And so that resulted in them saying, heck, we're going for it. And we're going to do a 40,000 person trial based on this number of people, which to me is a little surprising. But again, that was the data. So before we jump to any super critical comments about that, just keep in mind that the data set they used to base the entire trial on was very small, but the whole thing was they were basing it against people who had already had the infection to show immunity. And now that we look at the clinical data on the trial, is all the people who got 95% of the people who got the vaccine are immune. So we would assume, like always, which is a canon of immunology, that if you get an infection that you make antibodies to, lo and behold, you're immune. And that's what the whole point of all this is, in a bunch of gobbledygook, so I'm sure that was very confusing. But the bottom line is this: a tiny group of a study ended up being the basis for this huge study, and basically everyone's pretty much immune, 95%, by 2 doses, and probably after 1, but get both doses because that's the recommendation, and I'm not going against it, but that's the reality. So the vaccine itself is very safe. It's an RNA vaccine. I don't understand why people won't get it, because there's not micro machines that are going to attack you or make you infertile or anything like that. It's a very quickly metabolized RNA vaccine, so it doesn't last very long in your system, but it stimulates protein production. So we'll see what happens with that. I have been amazed, though, at the lack of adoption across some groups at hospitals. Number 2, we can't seem to get the vaccine out. Oklahoma, way to go, State Health Department. We're number 10 in the country for vaccine use efficacy in terms of for the amount of vaccine we've put out. We've vaccinated approaching 50%, 48%, I can't remember what it was. The best is, I think, about 65%, but that was in a small state. Texas is doing well with over 50%. You look at California, they're at about 25% vaccine usage, and they've gotten, per administration, which means that they've gotten almost 4 million doses and only managed to give 1 million. That's pretty much a total fail when you're having 40,000 people a day plus get infected, especially since Oklahoma has its issues. One of them is we don't have a good infrastructure for healthcare with the state health department and the county health departments. And so they're really trying to make this work. California has a much more integrated public health system for a variety of reasons, but they can't get the vaccine out, which makes no sense to me. But it does, because it involves government, and everything the government does is a disaster, and it's just how it is. So the vaccine's looks really good. I don't really care which one you'd get. Get whichever one you can get as fast as you can get it, because the case numbers, we had over 6,000 cases one day last weekend. We had 10,000 cases in 2 days. Our 7-day average will probably end up being well over 4,000 this next week, but we'll have to see because the numbers float. And that's a lot of cases. There's a lot of people who've gotten sick. There's a lot of people we've taken care of. There's definitely long-term illness side effects. So all very important stuff to remember. Kim, you had some questions. I know I'm rambling, so I need some help and direction. Because I did have 1 or 2 more points about the vaccine, but they're slipping my mind.
Well, did you want to talk about when they said that it was more to keep you from getting as sick as you?
Yeah. The vaccine, the vaccine. There's some question. Does it prevent you? Does it limit your illness, or does it prevent you from getting COVID? It's both, with the emphasis once you get past 10 days. It prevents the illness. It's a 95% reduction by day 28. It's not limiting disease as much as it's in terms of you still get it and you just don't get as infected. No, you don't get infected. You don't get infected. That's why its vaccine efficacy was so high, because you don't get infected.
What about the CDC saying that COVID-19 is not driven by in-person classes?
Oh, the CDC finally, after 6 months or 7 months of repetitively quoting the comment that schools could be dangerous and even though all the data showed from the World Health Organization all over Europe that it was the safest, next to being inside an airplane, one of the safest places you could be, reversed and said the CDC reversed and said schools are safe. And this is one of the things that kind of drives me nuts about people in general, is you have someone like Governor Stitt, who's very consistently said that schools should be open. He then, again, I think pronounced something that said the CDC shows they can be open. Then he got criticized for saying, "Oh, you're going to believe the CDC on this and not on something else." Well, that's not the point. The point is he was right in the beginning, and he's still right now, just like he was wrong on some things, and he's going to be wrong on the same ones later. It's just stop nitpicking, okay? And if anyone who thinks that the CDC is the bomb, don't listen to me either, because
Listening to the wrong place.
You're listening to the wrong place. I didn't want to say you were an idiot, but you're an idiot because look at all the things they screwed up. They screwed up the testing. They lied about the masks. They've lied about tons and tons of data. They screwed up the approving remdesivir, this single biggest joke in the history of medicine in terms of not being effective for COVID and costing tons of money. And then they just put out their big pronouncement a couple days ago saying that if you leave the country, you can't come back without a negative COVID test. What? Is it Gestapo land? What is this? I mean, that makes no sense. It's a 3-day whimsical window. So you have to get, and it's not defined, but the CDC came out with a federal reg saying if you leave the country or you're not, I mean, basically, if you're outside the country, you're coming back, whether you're a citizen or not a citizen, you have to have a COVID test within 3 calendar days of your return, and it has to be a certain variety. Otherwise, you're not allowed back in. Well, how can a regulatory authority do that without going through a legislative process? But that's here or there. But one, that makes no sense. Are the people going to lock down for 3 days after the test? If they don't do that, it doesn't matter. 2, their prior recommendations said that there shouldn't be travel restrictions or quarantines, and that's was with thousands of percent more cases than what's coming in from overseas. The biggest source of COVID in the world is the United States. It's not people from overseas coming in, and it's not people coming back from being overseas. That's probably the safest group on the planet. I mean, there's just so many things wrong with it besides killing the tourism industry in these other countries, killing our tourism industry, and the fact that it's useless because they've exempted federal employees, essentially, in many respects, in terms of law enforcement, military, and a whole variety of things. Any airline person, so all those people can go to another country and come back and they don't get tested. And they're going back and forth sometimes multiple times a week. So it's just the stupidest thing ever. And it almost makes me wonder, is this like and I'm sorry, this is going to make everyone probably get frustrated too, but is this the Trump payback, the F you to the country for him losing? Because this had to go through CDC to FDA to a czar to Trump and his chief of staff to say, no, we're going to try to mess up all travel for United States citizens who aren't basically a federal government official or law enforcement or military. So makes no sense doing it 7 days before the next administration. Again, totally random, not scientifically based. Don't know what to say about it. And if they do that, they might as well just say, then why not? You can't go from town to town, because that's more dangerous than people flying in from another country. And God forbid you go to California or you go to Texas or here to Oklahoma. I mean, it's just stupid. And then they didn't put any exemptions in for the vaccine. So if you have a vaccine, you're not exempted. Say, hey, if you had the infection, you have antibodies, you're not exempted. It's no, you have to get a COVID vaccine within 3 days of traveling back. It's disturbing and disgusting. But I'm sorry, I'm rambling, so most everyone's going to need to probably not listen to this one. Sorry. And that's about it. So
there's some
could you ask some other questions,
Okay.
but research it. I feel sorry for any of you who have travel plans between now and forever, because you're screwed, because you're going to have to figure out how to get a COVID test once you're overseas in order to come back. And then it has to be validated. And so we'll see what happens with that.
We can post that too. We can post a link to it.
We'll post a link to it. Kim will, not me.
Okay, so question is, where is the flu?
It's everywhere, but it's not very... All viral infections are down this year.
Is that because of masks?
We don't know, but we think it's probably a combination of masks, hand sanitizer, social distancing, and probably most likely when you have a super prevalent disease, you have less of other diseases, infectious diseases.
With all the cases that we've had and now the vaccine, when will we reach herd immunity?
I think we should reach herd immunity in Oklahoma pretty well at the rate of our infection and vaccination. I'm thinking by April. Now, because it's a combination of, we have 345,000 positives, so you figure at least double that. If you look at the CDC data, it's 30% of the population has COVID antibodies roughly. So we're already, 30% of the way there. We get 30% of our population vaccinated. And so, I'm thinking April we'll have herd immunity in Oklahoma, the United States probably by the summer, the world a couple years. And that's just a baseline prediction. It depends if Biden rolls out the vaccine. If he can get 100 million people vaccinated in his first 100 days, we'll have herd immunity in the United States by May 1st.
Why do you need to wait 3 months after you're positive to vaccinate?
The reason you wait, and again, now this is one thing, there's no data showing safety for if you've had it getting vaccinated. I'm not saying don't do it, but there's just not any data. There's no literature search on it that you can find a paper saying, hey, we vaccinated, 500 of these people and this is what happened to them separately. We don't know. So what we do know is if you get a vaccine within 3 months, you're more likely to have a stronger reaction to it. That's why it's delayed. So what I would go with is if you had COVID, you don't get vaccinated for at least 90 days. If you got pretty sick with COVID, it would be 120. There's a little bit of data showing potential cytokine storm reactivation in people who got really sick if you get it earlier. Okay. And the other thing is you're immune. So it's stupid. Sorry. I mean, you're immune 95% of the time. Plus.
If you have zero response to the vaccine, does that mean it wasn't as effective as the people that get really sick?
No, you can get the vaccine without feeling ill. The question is, can you get the vaccine and not have any side effects to it and still be immune? The answer is yes. But if you, on the other hand, get a little sick, tired, worn out, like I did, probably it's a gimme you got it. But I'm going to check my antibodies tomorrow and see, because they should be sky high. We did check someone's antibodies, as I mentioned last week, who'd gotten the virus, who was about 2 weeks out, and hers were very high, consistent with where we would have expected. And she should be immune long term.
Are you seeing, or is there any knowledge with post-COVID irritability, anxiety, and depression?
Yes, I think COVID's inflammatory. So post-COVID, if you're having continual inflammatory mediator release, inflammatory mediators, of course, cross the blood-brain barrier, and they always do the same thing. They break down, cause your serotonin levels to fall. So cognitively and emotionally, you're at high risk for depression, anxiety, and in general feeling icky.
Okay. Last one. How long should you wait after you get your second pneumonia vaccine to get the COVID vaccine?
The current recommendations, if you get any vaccine, you wait 3 months before you get a COVID vaccine.
3 months?
Mm-hmm.
This person said they got the second one, and then they said 14 days after the pneumonia.
Well,
but her question was...
I could be off, but from everything I've read is the standard recommendations for someone who's an average risk person would be to wait 3 months. Now, if you're a high risk person, I'm sure that's it. Like, so if you're someone, you don't have a spleen, you're 65 years old, you have diabetes, you don't care. You got your pneumonia if you got your pneumonia vaccine in December and you can get your COVID vaccine, no, you get it right away. But if you're a low risk person, that usually wouldn't be the case.
Okay.
And I think much more commonly, people getting a pneumonia vaccine are high risk people, so that probably wouldn't be the one to count. It would probably be more if you get a shingles vaccine, measles, mumps, rubella, something like that, you want to wait 3 months. So I hope that was okay. Sorry if I was too intense. Bye.